Welcome to episode 20 of the Ready for More podcast.
You know, we have what I call internal stressors, which are how we think and how we feel and our patterns of consciousness. And we have external stressors, which are things that happen outside of us that cause us to go into stress. And we have to learn how to deal with all of those things. My advice would be to become aware of if you're stressed or not and start to change that.
Welcome to the Ready for More podcast, where we share success strategies and stories for women business owners, entrepreneurs who are ready for more for yourself and for your business. I'm your host, Heather Cameron, and I'm here to help you to discover your unique path to profitability, success, so you can achieve your more on your own terms. Are you ready for more? You can find today's show notes and links at www.igniteyourmarket.com/readyformore. So welcome to the Ready for More podcast. My guest today is Kim Knight of Kim Knight Health. Kim is a leader in the field of transformations of consciousness and personal development. She teaches women who have experienced child emotional neglect and life trauma how to take back their power and become masters of their well-being. Often her clients are exhausted or in pain with conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, IBS, and more, burned out through pushing themselves too hard, constantly approval seeking, though never feeling good enough, saying yes to everyone else except themselves and neglecting their own needs. So welcome so much, Kim, for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. That was your bio. Can you give us a little bit more about what you do and what your current business is and your expertise?
Yes, and I always find that really difficult to put succinctly into, you know, the traditional elevator pitch or 3 sentences or 1 sentence. But really, I focus on the topic of emotional mastery and how to manage and master one's emotional life. And that can play out in so many areas of our life, and it can play out either in, you know, whether we feel happy or not, but also in our level of health. Because if we don't deal with our unhappiness issues and our past trauma issues, then they turn up as physical symptoms later down the line. So often people can walk in the door with physical problems, and often they've been to lots of different people and they can't understand why they're not getting better. And what they discover is that they've not been addressing the emotional component of the illness. They've been focusing on the physical side of things, such as what they eat and eliminating this, that, and the other, and taking this, that, or other supplement. But if you don't get to the real root cause of the problem, which is another thing that I do root cause analysis. If we don't get to the root cause and deal with the emotional side of things, then we're not going to get full recovery.
That's fascinating. It must be. And I look forward to asking you some questions around how difficult it is or how different it is to be in an alternate area of medicine or an alternate approach to healing. And it resonates to me that you think about the holisticness of it. What led you to that? Because that's such a fascinating expertise that you had. What led you to that, to be an expert in that?
Yes, well, it wasn't planned. I can assure you of that. I was working actually in film and television production, which was my dream. I'd always dreamed of doing it, and I finally started doing it in my 30s. And then I started getting tireder and tireder over a period of months. And one day I walked into work and just quit on the spot. I hadn't planned it, but I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm so exhausted. And I went home, went to the doctor, was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, told that there was no solution or cause or known cause, and just told to go home and rest. And that led me on a very long journey for the next 10 years to discover, well, you know, why am I ill and what is it that I need to do to heal myself, which I did do, but it took me 10 years. So that is the short story of, you know, how I come to be doing what I'm doing.
How did you turn that into a business? Like, I mean, many people might find that, but how did you take that, like healing yourself and finding and being dogmatic, for a really good word, about figuring that out? How did you lead that into being a business? Well,
again, it wasn't really planned. I knew that I didn't want to go back to what I was doing before. I sort of did want to do the film work, but it was just so difficult to find the work. And my previous jobs before that had entailed a lot of personal assistant administration work, and I was really, really good at it, but I knew that I didn't really want to do it. So because I had been training over that 10-year period, I had explored over 250 therapies to get myself well. And then I found a few things that really seemed to be working, and I was studying them and training in them so much that I actually became qualified professionally, but I had no intention or interest of being a practitioner. But I became qualified in these, emotional processing therapies. And then I just thought, well, maybe I'll start working part-time as a therapist, and I'll just make up some flyers and do some business cards and put them around town, which is exactly what I did. I just got in the car with these flyers and business cards, because back then, this is like 12 years ago, the internet really wasn't, as it is now. And promotion was very different back then. And I just literally went to the libraries and community centers and organic shops, and I put up flyers. And that was how it started. So it started very slowly, and I didn't really have a business strategy or planning. It was just following my nose.
Wow, that's exciting, because I started business 15 years ago, so I understand what you mean by it was a different world of promoting, in some respects simpler, because it was, it had a simpler approach. In other respects, a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive. To get a website 15 years ago was a effort, and it was an expense. Why now it's not, it's neither of the above. There's other stuff that has taken that over, but it's definitely different.
Yes.
So are your clients, do you primarily work with your clients in a face-to-face environment, or do you work with them in an internet-based environment, or how do you work?
Well, I used to work, everything was one-on-one, face-to-face when I started. So mainly it was people from Auckland, and sometimes people would drive from other nearby cities. And I started in 2006. And in 2009, I just had this feeling that I wanted to start doing things online. And this was before online became really, the thing. And it was just more of an intuitive thing. And actually, the first thing that started it off was a lady in her 70s who lived 3 hours away by car, who couldn't drive because she was too exhausted with chronic fatigue. And she kept on phoning me and saying, will you do it over the phone? And I kept on saying, no, I don't think it'll be as effective. And on about the third call, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. And as soon as I did that, I found that it was exactly as effective as doing it in person, which really surprised me. And I found that I was really good at doing it. And back then, again, we didn't have all the sophisticated apps that we have now. We just had Skype. And I used to do it without video, so it was just through the audio. And then I started rolling out some online programs and really exploring, how can I do more of this online? And then I started getting people contacting me literally from all over the world. I've worked with people from so many different countries in almost every continent. And now, since the last 3 years, it's only online. Everything online programs, online one-to-one coaching. Unless I go and give a talk or a presentation, obviously that's a little bit different. But as far as working with clients in a group environment or a one-to-one environment, it's all remote, and it works really well.
That's fascinating. That's a wonderful example and a fascinating story about how you can take something that you stumble on for need, that you learn and you become an expert on, and then you can turn it into not just a local business, but you can turn it into an online virtual business and affect and touch people all over the world. And it doesn't have to be the traditional things that we think online businesses can be.
I don't know what a traditional online business would be. I have come across so many different online businesses.
We often don't see people thinking of that healing, that transformation or healing in the same way. Or maybe that's my limited belief. So
originally, I think we could say that maybe 3 to 5 years ago, but now it's really changed. A lot of coaches are working online.
Yes, yeah, I do agree. And that's, I think, a great example of you can pretty much do anything online. I actually have someone I follow who's starting to teach people how to massage themselves online and to help them use massage, an actual hand-on therapy, by showing them how to do it and how to do lymph node draining and stuff like that online. So you're right, anything can be done online,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. Running your business isn't easy, and you've been through a transformational part of it. What drives you to keep doing what you're doing? What drives you to stay in business and keep doing this?
I think, either there's a complete madness there, or it's really there's an inner drive from a higher calling, is the only answer I can really give.
Mm-hmm.
Because it has been so tough in so many ways, and mainly financially very tough, but also just doing everything by myself and not ever being able to afford to pay for the right, for the help that I would like. And there have been many times where I have literally thought, this is it, I'm done. I just can't carry on like this. I'm unwilling to keep going, not knowing whether I'll be able to pay the rent or buy food, and really feeling like I'm done. And then literally 2 hours later, I'll be back at my computer again. I would have crawled into bed for 5 minutes, shed a few tears, and then back at the computer again. So yeah, there's some deep drive that is beyond, my normal personality comprehension.
But that's, I love that in a way, because it's that sense of being, I love being an entrepreneur, but being an entrepreneur and being on your own isn't easy, because you don't have the safety nets of a salary, and you don't have benefits, and you don't have all those things. And yet it's a unique thing that keeps driving those of us who choose to go that path to continue to do it. And I think you captured it in a really unique way of, yep, I'm going to quit, I'm going to get away from this, and then back we go into it. And it's, I think, heartwarming for other people to know that we all go through those kind of stages of feeling it isn't easy and it isn't fun, and it's not always that. So thank you for sharing that. What has been the most important thing you've learned? So you've been in business for 12 years, you've been running this. What's the most important thing that you've learned?
I don't know that I could say the most important thing, because I think there are so many important things. So I'll probably share more than one. I think it's really important that you truly believe in the product that you're offering, or the service that you're offering, and that you're doing it from a desire to be of help and of service, and not, just from money. I think it's really important to get the right support system in place from a practical perspective. And one of the things I learned through Roger Hamilton's work, who teaches entrepreneurs how to be entrepreneurs, is that you always need at least a team of 3. And according to his profiling system, you can work out exactly what role that person should be. So for me, for example, I need an admin person and I need a finance person. And because I'm what is called a creator profile, so I have lots of ideas and I'm very forward thinking, but I need that admin and admin support and financial guidance. So I haven't actually achieved that yet. I'm still doing most of it by myself, with an occasional bit of, actually this is not true. I do have a great accountant, so it's not true. But I'd like to solidify my team, better than it is at the moment. But I've really learned that, and I really get it. So having a team is really important, and also having emotional support is incredibly important, because that's one of the things that's been the biggest lack in my life, is not having emotional support, which is why I do the work that I do. Because if we are encouraged and supported emotionally and mentally, that is what gives us the ability to continue on, especially through those difficult times. And if we don't have that, then it's only us trying to give it to ourselves, and that can be really exhausting. And it's interesting because the word encouragement comes from the word cœur, which is a French word. You probably know that, being in Canada, which means heart. And so when we encourage somebody, we give heart, and we help them to strengthen their heart. And I read a quote the other day, I can't remember it exactly, but by Dean Ornish, who is quite a well-known doctor, saying that, the most important thing for health is not, supplements, food, diet, exercise, whatever. It is love and support.
Yes. I think, yeah, that's powerful. I mean, you just said a lot of powerful things in what you said, which I love for sharing. I'm going to address the last one first and then come back to the first one, which was that sense of support. And I met a woman entrepreneur the other day, and she's like, I have support, but I don't have the right support because I've got my husband supportive, but he doesn't understand, he's not in the day to day, and someone else is supportive. So as entrepreneurs, we're often isolated. And that's one of the things that I really encourage people to do, is to recognize women are interesting. We can be really supportive and we can be really nasty. It's kind of a weird dynamic, but we have both sides of that. But reach out for a supportive community of women who can support you in this entrepreneurial journey and who can encourage you. I love that word. Who can encourage you and love you and help you when you're having those down moments, and just find that thing. And the second one, the first thing that you said that I think is really, I had never heard it said that way, is having that three people in your organization and knowing what they are. And you're probably a good representative. A lot of entrepreneurs are creative souls. And so having as a coach, I encounter a lot of women entrepreneurs who bounce around in their ideas because they want to do everything. And it's like, oh, you can't do everything at once. You got to focus on doing that. So having that three is a really interesting idea.
Yeah, and I also think having a business mentor and guide, and somebody who knows how to show you what the things that to do that you don't know. So for me, that's the marketing and the sales. It's just so important to have that support. And I, again and again and again, I've heard people say that they couldn't have succeeded in business without their mentor or, their business guide.
And I agree, even as a business coach, I like to have a business coach, right? It's one of those, it helps to have somebody because we all have blinders, and I'm great at helping somebody else do something, but when I try to do it myself, I have a hard time. You mentioned the 30-second speech. I can craft anybody's 30-second speech, but I can't craft my own. So having those mentors and those people to help you is a really important part of that. So thank you for sharing all of that. But you mentioned this earlier, but I'd love to kind of hear it in a business context, is how much does your gut play in a role in how you run your business and decisions that you make? How much do you listen to that intuition? And
a lot, and probably because it's one of the things that I teach, and I've trained myself quite strongly in how to use what are called the multiple brains. So we have three brains: the head, the heart, and the gut. So I'm a multiple brain integration coach. I've got my own program in how to listen to the multiple brains, and learning to master emotions is all about listening to the three brains. So a lot.
I love that, listening to your head, your heart, and your gut. It's very good business advice too, in the sense of knowing and making decisions from all three of those places is a really holistic way to approach decision making. One of the things that I talk about in my podcast and in my own teachings is how to manage the shoulds. So we have, as business owners, there's lots of people telling us what we should be doing in our business and how we should be doing that. How would you've given your expertise and being in business for so long, how do you recommend and how do you manage the shoulds?
Well, it probably is related to the question you asked before, is using the three brains. So, yes, listening to the logic and analyzing that and rationalizing, but also listening to what the heart feels and what the gut says, and combining all of that into making decisions. Because when we use our three brains together, we make decisions from a place of what is called wisdom. So we make wise choices. And I don't really do shoulds anymore. In fact, one of the things I always say to people is change a should to a could. Because a should can make us feel imposed on or maybe even guilty or whatever. So I don't really use that word much at all.
And that's what I try to get is business owners to change the should into a want. Do you want to do it or do you not want to do it? And even if you do want to do it, do you want to do it now? Or do you want to do it 6 months from now? Because I think there's I often hear from women that I speak to, that they're overwhelmed with everything that everybody's telling them they should be doing in their business, or where they should be on marketing and they should be doing that. So trying to get them to decide, if you never want to be on Instagram because it's just not your thing, you don't need to be on Instagram. So being able to come to that, and maybe that in that sense is understanding your gut and your
and it's about developing trust. It's about developing self-trust. So, for example, I have had very, very little, and I'm talking almost sub-zero support emotionally from my family for the work that I'm doing. And in fact, I've had, the opposite of that in terms of go and get a proper job. What you're doing is stupid, it's rubbish, you're never going to make a living at it. Give it up, go and do a proper job. In other words, go and sit in an office and be bored to tears and get sick again because you're so unhappy. And it's taken me a long, long time to truly come to trust that what I'm doing is the right thing, and that following my heart is the right thing. Because often the shoulds can come in the head, and, the voice of mother. And there was an interesting quote that I picked off Dharma and Greg, the series Dharma and Greg. And it was like, how can you say your mother is distant when she lives inside your head? And so, we really have to learn to trust ourselves. And that means that we have to learn to connect with what I refer to as, and what is referred to in, the philosophies that I've studied as our true self. We have to learn to really connect with our true self and know that that is what or who, you can't really say whether it's a what or a who, is guiding us, and trust that rather than anyone else, even beyond our own self. It's this true self is guiding us.
That's very powerful. And I laugh a bit when you say some of the things about your family not understand. My family is entrepreneurial, and yet they don't understand what a business coach is. So they're like, well, you could get a job. You'd be really good at this. And I'm like, I'm good at what I do. But even in my entrepreneurial family, I do something that isn't necessarily understood, because my father ran his own plumbing contracting business, and it's a different business. It's a service-based, client-based, but a very tangible business, and they don't quite understand, or didn't. And it was, my mom used to say to me, you'd be really good at this. And I'm like, Mom, I'm good at what I do now. So, and yes, my mother.
It takes a lot of courage and strength to stick to one's guns. And that is part of the test.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's, I think a lot of entrepreneurs deal with that. A lot of, that uncertainty or going out, especially if you're doing something that's not something people understand, a profession or a choice that's not, in my case, business life coaching, and what you're doing is something that's newly emerged in the last 10 years for me. So there's still a lot of lack of understanding of it. So I think having that strong sense of self, and that is a wonderful piece of advice. And thank you for sharing that. In hindsight, is there anything you would have avoided or done differently?
Oh, lots of things. I think I would have, strategy is something that I've been quite weak on, and I would have got, business support and guidance much earlier. But then I didn't know to do that. So getting the right support, getting that team in place, and really sorting finances and budget a lot better.
Excellent. I just did another interview prior to this one, and that was also came out of it is be on top of your numbers, be on top of your budget. And one of the episodes I've kept coming out next week, I think in December, will be similar, the same thing, about a revolving theme around it's important that we know our numbers and we know our budgets and we have a strategy behind that. So that's an important part for all business owners. How do you recharge your batteries? How do you, as we all go through this, entrepreneuring can be a sucking of energy. And how do you recharge yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm not, again, because that's one of the main things that I have learned and now teach is how to look after oneself. Mm-hmm. I call it radical self-care. So I have excellent time management and work-life balance, which means I don't exhaust myself in the first place. And this is what we call illness prevention, rather than getting to the point where you burn out. which is what I previously did. You know, I burnt myself out twice. So I've done a huge amount of training in self-care, and particularly I've trained in several Qigong methods for re-energizing and healing the body. And so I have a daily practice, or it's more or less a daily practice. It's taken me quite a long time to build it up to become a daily practice. I've had a lot of resistance, because we can often have a lot of resistance to what is good for us. So my daily Qigong, meditation, walking, eating well, just basically looking after myself on an hour by hour daily basis, then allows me to stay healthy.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And it's funny how we as women don't tend to ever put ourselves first. It takes a lot of effort, I think. And you must find this with clients you work with, to get us to put ourselves as that number one priority.
That's why I teach people how to put themselves first. It's one of the main things that I do, and how to do that in a practical way.
That leads perfectly into our next part, which is how can, like, from knowing the audience is women entrepreneurs, I'd love to hear what you would share with them for women who are going through this. You know, some of them are working themselves or working hard and not taking care of themselves in the process. What advice would you give them? How would you approach that?
That is a huge question to answer, and the answer will be different for every person. But I'll share it through a story. Is, as I was getting well, it took me 10 years to get to the point where I could say that I was 95% better from chronic exhaustion and also clinical depression, which I had prior to the exhaustion. But as I got well, I suddenly realized that I was super stressed, and I hadn't actually recognized that stress before. But one day I was sitting on the porch and I thought, wow, I'm just always stressed. It's like my mind never switches off. I can't sit down for more than 5 minutes without, feeling like I've got to get up and be doing again. I'm running around like a crazy rabbit. That's how I used to refer to myself. I never have time to speak to people. They ring me up and I go, I can't talk to you now, too busy. So there was just like always this stressed busyness. And I realized that, wow, actually, this doesn't feel good inside of me. It feels like I just can't switch off. There's this switch inside of me of this ongoing stress vibration. And actually, it doesn't feel good. And I made a commitment that I was going to do whatever it took to de-stress. And I recognized that actually I was addicted to stress. And so for the next 3 years, I watched myself and I investigated myself in every type, all the thoughts that I had, all the feelings that I had, all the lifestyle habits that I had, all my behaviors, everything. I watched everything. And if I noticed that it either perpetuated the stress I was already in or triggered even more stress, I changed it. And that process took about 3 years and totally changed everything. So my advice is really get on top of stress. According to Harvard University, at least 80% of illness is caused by stress, and I would say that it's 100. So we really need to, become really aware of what are all the different factors that are creating stress. And I have a system, which is too complex to explain now, but we have what I call internal stressors, which are how we think and how we feel and our patterns of consciousness. And we have external stressors, which are things that happen outside of us that cause us to go into stress. And we have to learn how to deal with all of those things. Obviously, not all at once, that's too much. But my advice would be to become aware of if you're stressed or not and start to change that.
So as you were telling that story and thinking of stresses, I'm like, I can put that stress in this category and that stress in that category. And, and it's funny because I find for myself, I deal better with certain types of stress than other types of stress. And it's, I'm great in a crisis. Level-headed, can deal with it, really, really good in a crisis. But then the everyday stresses can be more difficult to deal with. So I can see that. What would you, When you work with somebody, how do you work with them? Like you mentioned groups and you mentioned other things. How could someone who might be interested in some of what you're doing, how could they work with you, or how would they be able to, what's the process, I guess would be the question.
The process, and this is always, evolving, but at the moment is that people, first of all, need to fill in a form to give me some information. Then depending on what they put in that form, we may or may not have a conversation, online. And also, although normally I need a form filled in first, I have what I call a foundation session. And when I say foundation, it means if you're building a house, if you don't put a foundation down, you can't build the rest of the house.
Right.
So what happened to me was that over that period of 10 years of searching for answers, and it was after the first 5 years that I started to find answers, but it still took another 5 years of exploration and also implementation of what I was learning to change things. What I found was, and actually I often find this with business coaches, is that they like to dive straight into giving a solution, but they don't really know anything about you. And I find that then they're missing big chunks of really important information that is necessary to know before suggesting or advising a solution. So I've developed what I call my foundation session, where I get a total understanding of a person's life in one go. It's like getting a helicopter view of one's whole life, literally from the moment they're born to where they are now, no matter how old they are, in order to see why they have the problems they're experiencing. And the reason for doing this is that we heal people, not illness. We heal a whole person's life, not a health condition. So that's a quote for you, for your little quotes. It's so important. We heal a person, not a health condition. So in that foundation session, we get the total picture of A, what has caused any problems they're experiencing now, and B, out of that naturally comes the solutions. I can easily see the solutions that need to be applied. So that shortcuts everything and wastes heaps and heaps of hours of, unnecessary sessions or sessions that aren't going to work. And then from there, if I'm working one-on-one with somebody, then I will, at the end of that session, say, okay, well, this is what I think needs to happen, and make my suggestion, and they can say yes or no. I also do a lot of online programs, and I love doing online programs. So I have a range of, it's all around emotional well-being, really. So I've got a de-stress program, a stop depression program, overcome loneliness program, and the big one at the moment, which is what I would call my life's work program, is called Emotional Alchemy. And it's everything to do with emotions in a really practical way of how to get rid of emotions and how to manage one's emotions, and how eventually to come to a point where you no longer have to experience negative emotions. And a lot of people would find that unbelievable, that it's possible to get there. And I used to feel that, even though I knew a heap of techniques and was using them and was quite emotionally masterful, I still believe that, we have to experience negative emotions, that they're never going to stop. And through the training that I've done, I've come to realize a higher level of reality of actually we can even go beyond that and get to a very different place of functioning as a human being.
It's fascinating. Very fascinating. What, in the context of someone listening, what advice would you give them that they could, something that they could start to do today that would help them be more aware and more looking holistically at what you spoke about? Is there anything that, this is kind of a piece that they could embrace?
Sort of need to know what the problem is to give the advice, if that makes sense. What are they
just thinking of a woman who's got a business, they're feeling stressed, there's a stress element to what they're doing. They might be on occasion feeling lonely and kind of isolated, and they're like, the audience here is ready for more, so they want more, but they definitely have a lot of self-doubts that are going on, and confidence issues most likely as well that are going on to get them to that next level.
I think the number one thing, and you said the word, was awareness. And one of the things that is one of the phrases that I find myself saying a lot to people is we don't know what we're unaware of. So we're not aware that we're not aware until we become aware.
Yeah.
And so the first step in change of any kind is to become aware. And that would be the same in business. You know, you've got to know what's not working in order to change it. And from a personal perspective, we have to become aware of what's not working and what doesn't feel good in order to change it. And so the first step is awareness that I have a problem. And often people can be unwilling to acknowledge that there is a problem. We don't want to face it. And often that's quite unconscious. So the first step is the awareness. And the second step is to acknowledge what is without resisting it, and to acknowledge it without judgment. And this is actually part of the 5 steps to emotional awareness, is to be aware that we have a feeling. And then the next step is to acknowledge it without judgment. And then the next step is to decide that we want to change it. And we don't have to know how, because often we don't have the tools to do it. Otherwise we'd already be doing it. But we do have to decide that we want to change it. So, for example, when I was sent home by the doctor diagnosed with chronic fatigue, and they told me that there was no cause, there was no solution, and I was at an absolute loss. And for the next 3 months, I sat on the couch every day, and the highlight of my day was watching The Love Boat. And that was it. It was like that was what I looked forward to every day, and the rest of the day was just a bit of a blur. And then one day the series finished, and I sat there on the couch and said to myself, well, what now? Because now I've got nothing to look forward to. And something inside of me sort of brewed up from inside and just said, you know what, I cannot spend the rest of my life doing this. I've just spent 3 months doing absolutely nothing. I'm bored to tears. This has to change. And I made a really, really strong vow inside of me that no matter what, I was going to find a way. And in that moment, I had no idea how, but I made the commitment. And that something changed inside of me. And from that moment on, I started finding little, bits of information and being referred to this person and this book and this workshop. And everything changed from that moment that I made the commitment. So there is awareness and acknowledgement, and then commitment to do something about it.
Excellent. What are the last 2 steps? It was a 5-step process, and now you have.
Well, that was I haven't given the 5 steps to emotional mastery. So the 5 steps to emotional mastery are awareness of whatever feeling we're feeling, acknowledgement of it, giving it attention, accepting it, and then taking action, doing something to dissolve it, to get rid of it.
Excellent. That's wonderful. And as you told your story and said that a lot of those same things apply to people, even in business. Like there's a lot of correlation to making decisions and feeling uncomfortable. And, we, as business people who I have a lot of women I know who their 40s and 50s, it's their second career. They've come from a corporate, for whatever reason, or they've never worked and they were home and their kids are gone and now they want that in their life. And there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of unknown. And in the same way, if they just commit to it, commit to that goal and really commit to what it is, they will find their way to getting there. And I often say,
we have to keep recommitting as well.
Because I often say, similar to what you say, you don't know what you don't know. So, if you're stuck, someone out there does know what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And you have to acknowledge that there's a need to fill, and you don't know what that solution is yet, but you need to go out and figure out that solution. Yeah.
And I think it's one of the most frustrating things as a coach, and you probably find the same thing, that you can very, very clearly see what that person needs, and that with your help, they could fast track in, 3 months or whatever. And yet without the help, they will flail around for another 5 or 10 years. And that really frustrates me, but there's nothing you can do to.
No, not if they're not ready. And I've had clients who have paid me, but they're still not ready. They're not ready to make those steps and make those transformations. And then we still work together and they get a certain amount of satisfaction, but they're not ready for the bigger transformation. We're getting close to the end of our time. How can people find out? How can they contact you? Where can they go? How can they find out more about your business?
My main website is kimknighthealth.com.
Okay.
And I do have a lot of videos on YouTube as well. So Google Kim Knight. I come up quite a lot in YouTube.
Okay. Yeah. I will be putting any of those links in the show notes as well. So they'll be able to contact.
And I have a podcast, which I occasionally do, called The Kiwi Health Detective.
Oh, I like that name. I'll put all of that in the show notes so people can access and do that. I always end with 3 questions. So the first question is, what would you consider your superpower to be?
That's a really great question. I think my superpower is just being able to see through everything incredibly quickly and see the cause of problems.
Excellent. That's a wonderful superpower to have. Do you have a favorite quote that you would share with the audience when it comes to mind?
Yes, it's on the back of my business card because I love it so much. Yes, so this quote is by Arthur Schopenhauer. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident.
Yes. Very good. Very good. And the last question is, what's the one most important message you'd like our listeners to take away from our conversation?
Just to be true to oneself and to look after oneself and to really understand oneself. And that means more than just, our physical body and our personality. It's about getting to our true self and being guided by that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your story with our audience. I know they're really going to enjoy it.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ready for More podcast. You can find today's show notes and links at www.igniteyourmarket.com/readyformore. My name is Heather Cameron. I'm your podcast host. And when I'm not hosting this podcast, I'm busy working with entrepreneurial women like you who are ready for more in their business and are looking to get focused on their own unique path to success. You can find more about myself and my programs at www.igniteyourmarket.com. If you like what you heard, feel free to rate, review, and share with your friends. And don't miss an episode by subscribing. Until next time, remember, now is the best time to focus on your more and be inspired by your own unique gifts.